The officer walked through the glass doors with his hand resting on his belt, and every head in the lobby turned, not toward him, but toward the woman standing quietly at counter 3. That was how it always worked. Accusation first, identity second. What none of them knew, not the teller with the tight smile, not the branch manager already sweating through his collar, not the small cluster of customers pretending to study their deposit slips, was that the woman they had just reported to the police was the reason every single one of them still had a job. She was Maya Caldwell, and as of 9 days ago, she was their regional president. But let me start from the beginning, because none of this happened all at once. I had spent 15 years building my way up through the financial industry, and I knew what the view looked like from the bottom. I had been a teller once, counter 2, a branch on Westfield Avenue, the summer after my first year of graduate school. I knew what it felt like to stand on both sides of the glass, and that knowledge was exactly why, when I was appointed regional president of First Meridian Bank's Southeast Division, I made a decision that my predecessor had never once considered. I would visit every branch in my region unannounced, dressed like a regular customer, before I introduced myself to a single employee. Not to catch anyone doing something wrong, to see what they did when they believed no one important was watching. My office was on the 14th floor of Meridian Tower downtown, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city in the early morning like something from a magazine spread. The furniture was new. The title was new. The assistant who brought me coffee every morning at 8:15 was new, and very eager, and said, "Yes, Miss Caldwell," with a kind of breathless reverence that still made me slightly uncomfortable. Everything was clean and bright, and full of the particular quiet electricity that comes with a position you have wanted for a very long time, and finally hold in your hands. I was 41 years old. I had worked for this through late nights and budget reviews and a divorce that happened partly because I was never fully present anywhere that wasn't a conference room. I was sharp and I was prepared, and for the first time in a long while, I was genuinely at peace with the shape of my own life. The morning I walked into the Hargrove Street branch, I wore dark jeans, a cream blouse, and flat ankle boots. No blazer, no badge. My hair was down, which I almost never wore it, because in meetings it made me look younger, and I had spent enough years being underestimated by people who confused youth with inexperience. My bag was a plain tan leather tote. Nothing expensive looking, nothing that announced anything. Inside it, in a standard brown envelope, was $18,000 in cash. A legitimate withdrawal I had arranged from my personal checking account, earmarked as part of a down payment on a property I was purchasing while my executive accounts were still being consolidated following my appointment. The money was documented. The account was in perfect standing. The transaction had been pre-confirmed by phone the previous afternoon. There was nothing unusual about it, nothing irregular, nothing that should have given anyone a single moment's pause. The branch was busier than I expected for a Tuesday morning. 6 teller windows, 4 of them staffed, a line of maybe 8 customers snaking back from the counters toward the entrance. I joined the line and took in the room the way 15 years of banking had trained me to do, the way you cannot stop doing once the habit is built into you. The signage near the mortgage desk was at least 3 product cycles outdated. The carpet runner by the entrance was visibly worn to a pale stripe down the center. One of the customer service reps at the side desks was turned 45 degrees away from the floor, speaking quietly into her personal phone, her hand cupped loosely at her mouth. Small things, each one meaningless in isolation. Together they described a branch that had stopped being looked at with care. I reached the front of the line in 6 minutes. The teller at window 3 waved me forward. Her name tag read, Diane. She was somewhere in her mid-30s, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and a professional smile that appeared as I approached, and then guttered out almost immediately, like a candle catching a draft from the wrong direction. "Good morning," I said, setting my bag on the counter ledge. "I'd like to make a cash withdrawal from my checking account." "Sure," she said, the word flat and brief. "ID and account number." I slid my driver's license across. She looked at it. Then she looked at me. Then she looked at the license again, just a half-second longer than necessary. In that particular way people have of comparing your face against an idea they already hold about you, checking whether the two things match up. I gave her my account number. She entered it, scrolled through the screen, and her fingers slowed. "How much are you looking to withdraw today?" $18,000. The silence that followed was short, but deliberate. She did not type anything. She folded her hands on the counter in a small, careful gesture. "That's a significant amount of cash," she said. Her voice had shifted, still polite on the surface, but with something beneath it I recognized immediately, because I had felt it pointed at me before. A quiet, premature authority. The particular tone of someone who has already decided something is wrong, and is now conducting the performance of due diligence. "It is," I said, keeping my voice easy. "Is there a problem?" "We just need to follow certain procedures for large cash withdrawals." She pulled a form from beneath the counter. "Can I ask what the funds are intended for?" The tightening in my chest was controlled, precise, not quite anger, more like recognition settling into place. I knew the BSA guidelines well enough to recite them in my sleep. A single, clearly identified withdrawal of $18,000 from a legitimate account with matching identification did not, under any federal standard, require a customer to justify their purpose to a teller. But I breathed steadily and kept my expression neutral. "It's for a real estate purchase," I said. "The funds are verified in the account." She nodded slowly, her eyes still on the screen. "I'll need to check with my supervisor for a moment," she said. "Just one moment." She stepped away from the window. Through the narrow gap between the partition and the wall, I watched her cross to a man in a gray suit near the manager's office. They spoke in low, fast words. He glanced over at me. I held his gaze steadily, without blinking, without smiling. He looked away first. That was the first moment I should have recognized exactly where this was going. But I gave them the benefit of every doubt I had, because I always did, and because the disciplined part of my mind insisted that this was protocol, that in a moment someone would return to the window and we would complete the transaction without further incident, and I would write a few notes in my portfolio and move on to the next branch. The man in the gray suit came to the window. His name tag read, "Branch Manager, Keith Ellison." He was late 40s, with a practiced warmth in his handshake energy, and the kind of customer service smile that doesn't reach the eyes and isn't meant to. "Miss Caldwell," he said, with a slight, careful emphasis on the Ms. that felt chosen, "I understand you're looking to make a significant cash withdrawal today." "That's right. $18,000. I called ahead yesterday afternoon to confirm the branch would have sufficient cash on hand." Something moved behind his eyes. Barely anything, but I caught it. He hadn't been told about the call. He glanced back toward the teller station, then returned his attention to me, with a recovered smoothness. "Of course," he said. "We do just need to verify a few standard compliance items for a transaction of this size. I'm sure you understand." "I understand compliance very well," I said. "What specifically do you need?" He guided me to a side desk. I followed him, because I wanted to understand the full shape of what was happening. He sat across from me with a yellow legal pad and asked, in the practice-neutral tone of someone trained to ask intrusive questions without sounding intrusive, where the funds in my account had originated, how long I had held the account, and whether I could provide documentation supporting the stated purpose of the withdrawal. I answered every question, calmly, completely, without hesitation. I showed him the purchase agreement on my phone. I showed him 2 years of account history. I explained, in polished and precise detail, the provenance of every dollar in that account. He wrote things on his legal pad, nodded at measured intervals, and radiated the specific discomfort of a man who has made his decision but is still moving through the theater of appearing to gather information. And then I noticed Diane. She had returned to window 3. She was not serving the line of waiting customers. She was watching me from across the lobby, with her phone held at a low angle near her hip. Her lips moved slightly. Her eyes did not leave me. She was not calling her supervisor. The cold went through me so fast it felt like something physical, a clean, sharp wave from the base of my spine upward that had nothing to do with the branch's air conditioning. She was calling the police. I knew it the way you know certain things before your conscious mind can name them. Before the thought forms completely, your body has already understood. Keith Ellison was still talking. Something about documentation timelines. I let his voice recede to background noise and breathed very slowly, and made a decision. I was not going to stop this. I was going to let it unfold. I was going to let every second of it happen, witnessed by every customer and employee in that room. And then I was going to do what I came here to do. I had $18,000 in a brown envelope. I had a driver's license. I had an account in flawless standing with a balance that would have rearranged Diane's entire understanding of the transaction. And behind the envelope, behind my phone, tucked quietly in the side pocket of my tote where no one could see it, I had something else. My executive credentials. My letter of appointment signed by the CEO of First Meridian Bank, dated 9 days ago, designating me regional president of the Southeast Division. The division that included, among 43 branches, this one. The glass doors opened. The officer walked in. The officer was young, maybe 26, 27, with a broad-shouldered posture and the careful sweeping look of someone who had been trained to read a room fast. He paused at the entrance, scanning the lobby. His eyes moved to Keith Ellison. Keith gave a small, almost imperceptible nod toward me. The officer walked in my direction. Every customer in the branch had gone completely still. The woman at the ATM in the corner had stopped pressing buttons. 2 men near the loan desk had their eyes fixed forward, watching the floor, watching the walls, watching anything except me, with the tense, avoidant energy of people who know something is wrong and have already decided not to be part of it. The only sounds in the room were the faint hum of the HVAC system and the unhurried rhythm of my own breathing. "Excuse me, ma'am." The officer stopped at the edge of the side desk where Keith and I were seated. "Are you Maya Caldwell?" "I am," I said. "We received a report of a potential suspicious transaction. Would you be willing to step outside with me for a moment?" I looked at him for a long, quiet beat. Then I looked at Keith Ellison, who had composed his face into an expression of neutral, procedural concern that I recognized instantly as rehearsed. Then I looked across the lobby at Diane, who was standing very still at window 3, her arms folded against her chest, watching with the tight, satisfied posture of someone who believes they have done the correct thing and is waiting to be confirmed in that belief. "That won't be necessary," I said. My voice was completely level, with a particular quality of calm that I had developed over years of boardroom confrontations, the kind of stillness that made people lean slightly back without knowing why. "What I'd like to do instead is handle this here, in front of everyone." Keith cleared his throat. "Ms. Caldwell, I think it would be more appropriate to—" "I'd like everyone to stay exactly where they are," I said. Not loudly, not sharply, just clearly, in a tone that had learned to carry without effort. The lobby responded to it. Nobody moved, including you, Diane. Diane uncrossed her arms. Her expression shifted, just fractionally, just enough. I reached into the side pocket of my tote. I placed my executive credentials on the desk between us with the deliberate, unhurried gesture of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment. The letter was on First Meridian Bank letterhead, embossed, signed in dark ink by the bank's CEO, Warren Holt, a man whose name every single person in this branch would have recognized immediately. Regional President, Southeast Division, effective March 13th. 43 branches, including this one. Keith Ellison looked down at the document. The color did not drain from his face so much as quietly migrate somewhere else, leaving behind a kind of gray, damp flatness. The officer read it over his shoulder. He stepped back. "I called ahead yesterday afternoon," I said, and now I was speaking to the room, not just to Keith. "I confirmed with your teller staff that the branch would have sufficient cash on hand for a standard personal withdrawal of $18,000 from a checking account that has been in excellent standing for 7 years. I provided identification. I provided documentation of the transaction's purpose. My account balance exceeds the withdrawal amount by more than 11 times. I paused and let the arithmetic sit in the room. And someone in this branch called the police on me. The silence was absolute. Keith's mouth opened. "Miss Caldwell, I want to assure you that our procedures require—" "I know your procedures, Mr. Ellison," I said, and the quiet in my voice hardened just slightly at the edges. "I wrote 3 of them. I want you to think very carefully before you finish that sentence." He closed his mouth. I turned to the officer. His expression had shifted entirely. The practiced professional authority had been replaced by something much simpler, a man recalibrating, quietly and quickly, with the focused look of someone updating their understanding in real time. "I appreciate you responding," I said. "I don't believe your presence here is necessary, but I do want your name and badge number for my report." He gave them to me without hesitation, in the tone of someone who has understood completely and has chosen the correct side of the situation. I wrote them in the small notebook I kept in my tote. Then I completed the transaction. Keith Ellison processed it himself, personally, at the main counter, in front of every customer and employee still standing in that lobby. He counted out the cash twice. He said, "Thank you for your patience, Miss Caldwell," in a voice that had lost all of its earlier composed authority and come out scraped and thin. I signed the receipt, folded the envelope into my bag, and then I stood still for one final moment. Diane had not moved from window 3. She was staring at the counter in front of her with the particular frozen quality of someone whose internal world has just restructured itself completely and hasn't yet figured out how to wear a new expression. "Diane," I said. She looked up. "I want you to take a look at every customer who came through this branch today, every single person who waited in that line." I let the pause hold. "None of them should ever have to explain themselves the way you asked me to explain myself this morning. That is not what this bank is for." I held her gaze for one steady beat. "Human Resources will be in contact with you tomorrow." I walked out through the glass doors into the pale morning light. I sat in my car for 4 minutes before I started the engine. Not because I was shaken. I had passed through shock and come out the other side somewhere around the moment Diane picked up her phone. What I needed those 4 minutes for was something quieter and more difficult than anger. I needed to let myself feel the weight of having been right about something I wished I had been wrong about. There is a particular kind of grief that comes with confirmation. You hope, every time, that the thing you have been bracing for won't materialize, that the assumption you are tired of having to make will turn out to be unnecessary, and when it materializes anyway, precisely as you anticipated, the anger is almost secondary to the exhaustion of having known. I had been through this before, not at this level, not with the specific, almost Baroque irony of being reported as suspicious in a branch I was days away from supervising, but I had been through the architecture of it, the tightened smile, the extra question, the request to justify, the moment where everything you have built and every credential you hold becomes invisible, and you are reduced, by a stranger's assumption, to a category. The first time it happened, I was 24 and a junior analyst, and I cried in a parking structure for 15 minutes and then went back inside and did my job. By 41, the tears had been replaced by something else, a cooler, more precise response, like a compass needle swinging to true north. I called my assistant, Renata, and told her I'd be in the office by noon. I told her to have the branch performance files for Hargrove Street ready on my desk and to reach HR Director Sylvia Park and ask her to hold the afternoon. Then I told her to reach Warren Holt's office and ask for 15 minutes at his earliest convenience, because what had happened this morning was not going into an email. Renata, who was excellent and picked up tone like a tuning fork, simply said, "Yes, Miss Caldwell," and then, after the smallest pause, "Are you all right?" "I will be," I said. "I started the engine. I genuinely will be." Warren Holt listened to every word without interrupting. He was one of those rare executives who use silence as an active choice rather than an absence of response, and by the time I finished he had not moved from his position. Forearms resting on his desk, fingers loosely interlocked, eyes steady on mine. "I want you to know," he said, "that I am not going to insult you by expressing surprise." "Good," I said, "because I'm not here for your surprise. I'm here for what comes next." What came next was a formal HR review of the Hargrove Street branch, which Sylvia Park initiated within 24 hours. Diane's employment was terminated 11 days after the incident, following a review that uncovered that this had not been an isolated decision. 2 prior complaints from customers of color had been filed against the same teller in the preceding 18 months. Both documented, neither escalated with appropriate seriousness. Keith Ellison received a formal written warning and a mandatory training requirement with a 60-day review period. The branch underwent a full compliance and culture audit, the first in over 4 years. Several other procedural gaps were identified and corrected. These are the facts, and they are clean and satisfying on paper, the way that institutional accountability sometimes is when the documentation is in order and the authority to act is unambiguous. But the facts do not capture the afternoon I sat alone in my office on the 14th floor, the city spread out beneath me in the early spring light, and let myself be something other than regional president for a while. Let myself be a woman who had walked into a room and been seen as a problem to be managed. Let myself feel the specific, familiar weight of that. And then, slowly and deliberately, let it go. 4 months later, on a Tuesday in late summer, I stood in the Hargrove Street branch for the second time. This time I was wearing my charcoal blazer. My badge was at my lapel. Renata walked 3 steps behind me with a portfolio under her arm, and the assistant branch manager, Keith Ellison's replacement, a young woman named Patricia Reyes, who had transferred from the Brookdale location and had already improved the branch's customer satisfaction scores by 14%, was at the door to greet me. The carpet runner by the entrance had been replaced. The signage was current. Window 3 had a new teller, a young man with a steady, unhurried manner, who made eye contact and said good morning to every customer who approached his window as if he meant it. I stood near the center of the lobby for a moment and looked at the room the way I had the first time, the way you cannot stop looking at things once the habit is formed. And what I saw was different, not perfect. Nothing is ever fully arrived at, and I knew better than to confuse a corrected roster with a corrected culture. But different. Measurably, documentably different. People were being helped. The air was not thick with the ambient tension that had been present in this room on the morning of my first visit. The tellers were engaged and present, and moving through their transactions with the focused efficiency of people who understood that their job, at its most fundamental level, was to serve. Patricia Reyes walked me through the performance updates, and I asked good questions, and she had good answers, and at the end I told her she was doing strong work. I meant it. On my way out, I stopped at window 3. The young teller, Marcus according to his tag, looked up with the steady, easy eye contact I had noted when I came in. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, Marcus," I said. "You're doing a good job." He smiled, a real one, not a professional approximation. "Thank you." I walked out through the glass doors. The morning was warm and bright, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the September sun, with my badge at my lapel and my portfolio in hand, and the particular kind of quiet in my chest that doesn't come from things being perfect. It comes from things being changed, from having been in a room where something was wrong, and having used every tool available to you. Your title, your documentation, your absolute refusal to make yourself smaller than the moment required, and having watched the room become different because of it. Renata appeared at my elbow. "Car's ready," she said. "You have the Brookdale review at 2. "Let's go," I said. I took one last look at the branch through the glass, at Marcus at window 3, at the clean carpet runner, at the updated signage, and then I turned and walked toward the car, with the straight spine and measured step of a woman who has been exactly where she intended to be all along.